Hello and welcome back to the building of the Keil Kraft Ladybird. The wings have now been covered and I'm about to start covering the fuselage, and I suspect it'll be quite a challenge due to the shape of the fin area as it blends in to the fuselage itself. Some compound curves there which will need addressing. But before I do that, I thought I'm going to take advantage of the clear nature of the doculam, and I'll use that to glaze the side windows. The front window or front screen will need to be made out of acetate in the conventional way, but I'm going to take advantage of the clear nature of the doculam to actually glaze these areas. But before I do so, I'm going to actually apply the tissue first and then put the doculam over the top of this area, the total opposite of the technique that I've used to actually do the wings, which was obviously the reverse of that. So here we go. So let's get sticking some of this down. I'm going to lightly apply it with the tissue to begin with, rather with the Pritt stick, and then I'll dope through that, and when it's all dried I can trim it off nice and neat. That'll be a lot easier than it would be trying to cut the shape of the windows out directly into the tissue. So if I just cut some couple of strips, looks like a fairly good guess for the correct width. Now, I don't know the make of this tissue. I know that the density of the colouring on it's not the best, but it gives a very authentic feel, I think, to a vintage model. So that's in place. What I'll do now is put some dope right through it. Once again, I'm using a sharp knife. It's a nightmare trying to cut tissue without one. I'm working indoors here with dope, not a good combination. Windows wide open, and hopefully with a bit of time the wife won't notice the smell too much when she comes in. If she does, I'm in trouble. Living dangerously. That won't take long to dry, goes off very, very quickly. It's best to leave it. I'm trying to cut through it there when it's wet. It's never a good idea. Let's put some on the side here. Do that. I've spent the last couple of days away from aero modelling. I've been prepping a model railway layout, or railroad as the guys across the pond call it. for an upcoming exhibition that I have an invite to. And it's made a nice change of pace. Perhaps after the weekend I'll have had enough, but I've really enjoyed doing a trial running session with the layout. And as I said on that video, if you haven't seen it, I think most of us have quite broad interests in modelling, even if we don't keep them all up all the time. I think most of us have done all kinds of model making. I think if it's in your blood, you just like making things and creating things. A few years ago I discovered oil painting and I found it very, very therapeutic. Actually did rather well, had a studio in New York, sell my paintings, but I don't feel the urge to paint anymore. Simply because I get the creative side of what I like, of what I need to do, out through model making. And I'm not saying I'll never paint or pick up a brush again. I may well do. But for now, this sort of thing satisfies that part of my nature that obviously I find a healthy place to be, as long as I'm being creative. If I'm being passive and just watching something on the TV, I'm never in a good place for very long. So this is my therapy. Some people go to a therapist, some people do yoga, some people find solace in religion. For me, if I'm making something and creating something, I get a real buzz out of it. So I'll let that dry. We'll come back to it when it's dried. I'll cut out the windows and we'll see what it'll look like with the Doculam applied. What are you doing there, Sully? You can't get out. Very naughty, Missy. The tissue's now dried around the windows, so I can begin cutting these out. And I just need to run the blade along the edge of the framing. And I should get a nice neat finish. I'm going to cut this one out, and then I'm going to change the blade because it's not as sharp as it might be. But there you get the idea that we'll have a nice neat blue outline when the glazing's applied via the doculam. Now that the windows have been cut out and we've now got the blue underneath, because I am intending on going blue for the upper half and white for the lower, it's time to start the doculamming process. I'm going to begin with the bottom, as I would with all fuselage, regardless of the covering material. And I'll begin with the hatch, actually, which is conveniently, there's a patch. There's enough material here in the sort of wastage that I can use to cover this. Doculam first, then tissue. I've got the iron heating up there. Yeah, that'll work. So always tack along the long edge first. That's my approach anyway. It helps if it's glued. Glue in the middle, actually, I think. I know that doculam will actually take a much higher temperature than solar film will. And I think people who've had some problems with it, it's because they've been ironing on too low a temperature. If you're not burning your fingers, you're probably not doing it right. Ow, ow, ow. Should have left a little bit of surplus on, it would have been easier to handle. It's okay. Turn that up a bit more. See if we can trim this. It is actually quite a tough material to cut, I find. Surprisingly so. I don't know what the thickness of it is, I'm sure I could look it up. But it's extremely thin but very, very strong, despite being thin. I just caught the magnet there, I wondered what was happening. Yep, I think we'll fold that over, trim it down a bit neater than that. Yes, happy with that. Let's trim this surplus off. I'm going to cut some darts in. I'm going to do that with the knife actually. Get a better finish. Because the lower deck's got a curve to it. It needs to overlap. This is of course going to be tissued and doped. Somebody contacted me via the response, if anybody reads the comments, it may have been actually on a Facebook page, where they said that their technique is the opposite way around. They apply the tissue and then the doculam over the top, and he said that it has the added advantage of being fuel proof. And from the photograph that he enclosed, he uses it on control line models. Now on this particular build, I want that look of the tissue. I don't want a shiny finish with a doculam, but I can think of a number of applications where that would be really good. In fact, Chris from Dad's RC Hangar, on his current build, he'd asked a question, he sort of inquired about a covering, and I passed that information on to him. And in a Hawker Hunter jet, I think it is, I think it would give a perfect finish if he did it in tissue, then did his camouflage finish with a light spraying on the airbrush, then covered in the doculam. He would get that shiny finish that you would need on a modern jet. So I don't know if he's going to take that advice up, but it's one that I'll have in the back locker that I may use in the future. As I've said to people before, I've got no qualms about using techniques used by other people. It's not about being the first. As I've said, if you copy from one person, it's plagiarism, but if you copy off lots of people, it's called research. And there's lots of ideas out there of how to do things. You've just got to find what works for you. And there's often more than one way of doing the same thing. Doesn't mean the other ways are wrong. And unfortunately, I think, as is human nature, on the internet you sometimes hear very bombast, that's not the word, very bloody minded people who can be quite insulting because they object to the way you've done something. Well, it's just my way of doing it. I'm not saying it's the right way. I'm just saying this is how I do it. It's there for people to copy, use. If I've found it somewhere else and somebody else has suggested it, I'll say that. If I think I've thought it up and nobody else has, then I'm stupid because somebody somewhere has thought of it. I'm just shrinking it now using the iron rather than using the heat gun. There's no need for the heat gun on this. Sometimes you have to use the heat gun because you can't get in with the iron. I might have to use it in that corner bit there actually. So there we go, that's done. I'll cover it with the white tissue, heat shrink it as I did before, and then carry on. And we'll keep coming back. I'll show you the stages as I go along. I think what I'm going to have to do, because of the compound shape of this, and the general rule is, if you're breaking up the covering, you do the rear parts first and then the forward parts, because the overlap is less likely to get ripped off with the wind. So I might do this little section, this awkward section here, as a separate job. We'll see. I'll certainly video that. I hope you could see that. This part here, I'll certainly video that part of the process. Pause it for now and I'll crack on. Back again. I've covered the bottom and I'm about to cover the side, and as this is the part with the windows in, I thought I'd show you this part live without time-lapsing it. So long edge first. It is a lot hotter, this iron, and I think that's the way you have to go with Dr. Lamb. I've made my mind up now, the way to work it. Seal the edge here. So looking good up to now. Could all go pear-shaped, as they say. But up to now it looks okay. That's that side done. Now I'm going to iron through onto the tissue, and sure enough, it works. I wish I knew the name of the chap that suggested it. I'll look it up and I'll get his name if I can find it. And if I heat the glazing, I think that works rather well. I would never get a finish as neat as that with acetate. So definitely the way to go, and it looks quite effective, you know. It's maybe a method I would explore in the future. Tissue first, and then Dr. Lamb second. Very, very impressed with that. If you wanted a shiny finish, that's the way to do it. I'm just shrinking between the balsa now with the iron. I'm not using the gun. I may have to resort to it in one or two places, but with the temperature racked up a little bit higher than I would normally work, that works really well. There we go. Glazing done. I'll crack on. We'll come back when it's all done. Back to the covering then. As you can see, I've actually done this really problematic area here, and because we have a compound curve, it's very difficult to cover it in one fell piece. So I've actually covered, that's one part here, and that's a separate piece here. And of course this material is so thin that you won't see any joins at all. I'm going to do the same on the other side. That's less problematic in the sense that I've had to actually put a balsa inlay in here, 132 balsa, to give something for the covering to be supported on, because we have the protrusion of the arm here for the servo. So that in a sense will be more straightforward. The only difficulty will be cutting around and a little bit of fiddle, cutting around the actual servo that comes out. But it's quite a complicated structure at the back, as you can see, but that of course adds massively to the character of it. So we'll press on, I'll do the other side, and then we'll finish off, and there'll be time to actually cover in the tissue.